Hey guys, how's it going? It's Baggins here, and today we are going to be looking at the PTR February release patch notes, specifically for patch 1. Now, I'll put a link to these in the description down below if you want to take a look through for yourself. Previously, the New World devs have stated that February is just going to be a month dedicated to bugs, bots, and bans, so no new content that we're going to see in these patch notes, which has me a little bit concerned because right now I do feel like the game is kind of dry in terms of content. We have the mutated expeditions which have come in, and they've been some degrees of fun. However, in comparison, doing all of the forms of content feels a little bit meaningless because the only way you can get the new gear score that go up to 625 is really with the mutated expeditions. Everything else kind of pales in comparison because you get such a little amount of umbral shards, or you don't get any at all. However, that is something that they will be addressing in the patch notes. I've taken a look through them myself. There is quite a lot of stuff in here, so we're just going to be breaking down and going through some of the highlights that I've picked out. And yeah, let's jump into this video. As always, if you guys enjoy this sort of stuff, make sure you go ahead and click the like button. Subscribe if you want to see more, and let's take a look at these patch notes. So the first thing that stands out to me, if I was to say anything is significant within this first section of patch notes, is the Taxodius mini-boss in Garden of Genesis can no longer be double killed. This is something that has been suggested that I do on the stream, but I've avoided doing it because, you know, I'm a good boy. But yeah, the mini-boss, the first guy with the pink hat at the start of Genesis, you can no longer kill him twice, so already off with, I guess, a fairly decent fix. The only other thing of note in these notable fixes, in my opinion, was the ancient AI that would spawn in Reekwater. If you go down to the south of Reekwater, there was a quest you could do where literally just hordes and hordes of skeletons would appear. I guess this is going to be toned down now so you can actually solo those quests because it was pretty insane previously. And then one other thing that I picked out that I thought was interesting here, players can no longer climb over the wall to enter the Siren Arena. This has been in the game for a surprising amount of time, but yeah, you can't jump over the wall to start the Siren Arena. Now you actually have to use a arena tuning orb in order to get into it. Going into the general AI changes, there's some stuff that I think is pretty awesome in here actually, and it does get me excited. It's not new content, but it is going to make the current content much less painful. The first thing here is going to be great for tanks. They've said they introduced a new player versus AI physics collider solution that will significantly reduce the amount of pushback from colliding with characters. So if you guys have ever tried to tank or fight some of the bigger enemies in the game, they just constantly shove you and knock you back all the time. It's super annoying to fight against them unless you have grit, like with Berserk on the hatchet or the 300 strength perk. So we haven't actually got a chance to play in the PTR yet and see what this is like. When that does happen, of course, there will be a link to it up in the top right, and if you subscribe, you'll get to see when that video comes out. But yeah, hopefully this is going to make fighting a lot of the enemies much less of a pain in the butt, because it is pretty miserable fighting a lot of different enemies in New World right now. They just shove you around all over the place. One other thing that's going to be great for tanks as well, it says it reduced pushback on block from most creatures attacked to 0. So if you're holding up your shield or you're blocking with your weapon, I don't think you're going to get shoved back anymore. And I think like one of the biggest deals for this is when you're fighting Scylla, the first boss of Lazarus Instrumentality. She shoves the tank back a lot, so should be just generally easier to position bosses now and actually keep them, you know, face towards the tank with the DPS standing behind them, rather than the boss just shoving the tank everywhere and not having any control over the fight. Scrolling down a bit, the next thing that I noticed of significance was the increases to Chardis, who is the final boss of Lazarus, and technically like the final boss in the game right now. Lazarus Instrumentality, in my understanding, is supposed to be like the hardest expedition, since it requires the most materials to make the tuning orb. You have to technically do Genesis to get the Blight Seeds to make the Lazarus Instrumentality key. So this is the final boss, and he's kind of a joke right now. However, from what I read here, he is going to be a little bit more difficult. They increased the damage of him by 25% across the board, then increased his laser damage by an additional 15%. The laser beam in his final phase does 15% of the player's health per second when it hits them. There's no longer the safe spot at the back of the arena where the bow users and the healers can stand. And on top of that, he is going to have the proper sort of strengths and weaknesses like all the other ancients. So he should count as an ancient now, which means he'll be weak to lightning and strike damage, but he will be resistant to, I think it's fire and slashing, question mark, something like that. But yeah, he should now count with like everything else in the Lazarus instrumentality in terms of strengths and weaknesses. All right, moving on to some really exciting stuff here. Something that I've been wanting in New World for such a long time is improvements to the weapon swap system. Weapon swapping in the game, especially if you're doing any PvP, it's just a massive pain. It really is just one of the things that upsets me the most about the game, but thankfully we've got some great changes coming in here, or at least, again, this is all on paper, so until we actually play it, we don't know how good it's going to be, but it sounds good. They say you can swap weapons during hit reactions, dodges, traversal, and while using consumables, except weapon coatings, because I guess there would be some sort of exploit there where you could weapon coat 2 weapons. This will not interrupt those actions. There's a 1-second swap cooldown in these cases. Weapon swaps will no longer be cancelled if you're staggered before the swap can occur. So if you're about to weapon swap and then you get hit with the Path of Destiny, the weapon swap still goes through, which is great because that happened all the time in most PvP scenarios. It also says weapon swaps and attacks can be queued simultaneously. So if you press the swap during an attack's recovery, then immediately press an ability key, the weapon will swap at the first swap cancel frame, then immediately perform the desired ability. So I think it's going to be easier to queue up a weapon swap. It says note that actions will still have buffer and cancel windows. This change just makes it easier to use and more reliable. So overall, I think this sounds like good stuff. Again, it is just on paper right now, so playing it in the game, we'll have to see. But weapon swapping just been a massive pain and thorn in the side for most New World players, so great to see some changes there. Dodging and blocking, we've shortened the recovery time for all of our dodges. Transitioning to movement after a dodge should feel more fluid for all players now. If you guys have ever dodged in the game, you dodge and then you sort of like, you're waiting for your character to kind of do something after you finish the dodge. Most people that I know who play New World and have played it for a while do the dodge animation cancel, so you don't actually get to see that recovery frame. But if you are not doing the dodge animation cancel, then this is going to be a lot more noticeable. They also say basic attack startups, melee and range can now be dodge and block cancelled for up to 2 frames before the first active frame. For melee attacks, the first active frame is the first frame the weapon can deal damage. So I guess if you're charging up a heavy attack with your great axe and then you decide, actually, I want to dodge instead, you can dodge. So this sounds really, really good because sometimes you're about to do an attack on the enemy and then you realize, oh wait, the boss has actually decided that it wants to kill me, and you spam the dodge button, but you can't because you've got to wait for your attack to go through. And also there's this issue down here as well where they say when performing light attacks with a melee weapon, block and dodge inputs will now take priority over the next light attack in the chain. So sometimes just spamming left mouse button, just, you know, clicking away rapidly, and then you decide, actually I do need to dodge, and you can't because the game wants to keep doing the attack chain that you were doing. So now dodges should take precedent, and this just sounds really, really good. This is what we wanted New World to be from the start when people thought it was going to be like Dark Souls combat where you could dodge at any time. My assumption is, from what they're describing here, it's going to be moving more towards that. So a lot more skill-based in your dodges, and the actual noticing that the enemy has done something and pressing dodge and the dodge actually happening should be happening much more often. Again, if the patch notes can be believed to be true and we try it out in the PTR. Big change for healers here. The 300 focus attribute bonus is actually going to be worth something now. Previously, it used to trigger mana regeneration when you hit exactly 0 mana, which was almost impossible to do because very frequently you would cast a bunch of spells and then you would go down to 8 mana. And if you had the number 8 as your total mana, you can't cast any spells because you only have 8 mana, so you'd have to wait till you get to 20 mana to cast a spell, which would then put you down to 2 mana because you've regened a little bit, and then you would have to wait again to go back up. So to get to exactly the number 0 on your mana bar was almost impossible to do, which meant that the 300 focus attribute bonus was just pointless. Whereas now it will trigger when you drop below 15, which certainly will happen much more consistently than hitting exactly 0. So yeah, glad to see the 300 focus bonus actually it is legitimately, I think, the worst bonus in the game right now, so it's going to have some more value. So rejoice, healers, especially those of us who stack high amounts of focus. We got a few weapon fixes and changes here. The biggest ones that I saw, in my opinion, were to the fire staff. So the fireball projectile radius went from 0.01 to 0.33, so actually a pretty significant increase in its size relative to what it used to be. So it should be much easier to hit the fireball. I don't really know what Amazon is doing with the fireball, because in the previous patch notes, I thought they said that fireball can't crit, but now fireball can crit again. So I don't know, fireball can crit until they make it not crit. Pillar of Fire, reduce the delay between Pillar of Fire's activation and spawning of its damage. So all that I read from here is Pillar of Fire is going to come out faster as an ability, and it should end faster as an ability as well. So Pillar of Fire will feel less clunky, which is pretty cool. I already felt like it was a pretty fast ability, but fairly good change there. Scrolling down to the Great Axe, there's some pretty big changes to the Great Axe here, at least from the PvP side of things. They reduced the Vortex pull to allow players a chance to escape, and this is on Gravity Well. So basically, if you get caught in a Gravity Well right now and you don't have a movement ability, that's it. You're stuck in the Gravity Well. Whereas if this reads how I believe it does, if you're caught on, I guess, the edges of the Gravity Well, you can actually escape out the side of it, which is pretty interesting. Pretty major change to Gravity Well there. Now moving on to the Ice Gauntlet, some pretty big changes here. They said they adjusted the projectiles fired from this upgrade to reduce the chance that the single target is hit with all 4 parts of the attack, and this is on Ice Spikes. So I guess the Ice Spike ability, if you guys have been hit with an Ice Spike lately, it hits really, really hard, especially if it's followed like with an Ice Storm or anything like that. And I assume is that because you're getting hit with all 4 parts of it. Yeah, sometimes you can get like 7,000, 8,000 damage with the Ice Spike on a player. So I guess those numbers are not going to be as high consistently because it says it reduced the chance that a single target is hit with all 4 parts of the attack. And then another pretty huge change here as well. They say that the Ice Storm, so there's actually a bunch of exploits right now with the Ice Gauntlet, or I don't know, things that don't seem like they're working as intended. I guess some people in the comments are going to be like, it's not an exploit because it's just what the tooltip says. Well, now they said they added clarification on the tooltip to state that it will only increase the damage from Ice Storm, whereas previously, if you had enemies inside of an Ice Storm, it would increase all of your damage, even on your secondary weapon, which meant you had a lot of people, they would run up to a bunch of people on a point, whether it was an outpost, rush, or war, drop an Ice Storm on them. Every single enemy that's in the Ice Storm increases your damage, so if you land an Ice Storm on 10 people, it's a damage increase of 100%, and then what people would do is switch to their secondary weapon, like the Great Axe, and they would do the Spin Attack, and the Spin Attack would do 100% more damage to all of those people inside the Ice Storm, which is just insane. It's really, really broken. So now it's only going to be applying to the Ice Storm if, again, if the patch notes are true. And there's also another bug or exploit where if you have different levels in the Ice Gauntlet, so you have a player who has a level 4 Mastery Ice Gauntlet, and then somebody has 5 Mastery levels in the Ice Gauntlet, somebody has 6 Mastery levels in the Ice Gauntlet, all of those Ice Storms could stack on top of each other and do different forms of damage, which actually breaks what Amazon have set out to do with most other magical effects in the game, where they don't stack on top of each other. So a Sacred Ground on top of a Sacred Ground doesn't equal 2 forms of healing. It's just 1 Sacred Ground. And in theory, 1 Ice Storm on top of another should only be 1 set of Ice Storm, but there was a way that players could get around that and put like 7 different Ice Storms in one area, which again was a lot of damage and really just making wars and most PvP content very miserable because it also brings in a lot of lag. So great to see those Ice Gauntlet changes hopefully going through. The next notable weapon change that I saw was to the Musket. They're going to be changing the stopping power ability. So it says the ability has been reworked and no longer empowers your next shot, but instead fires a special bullet after a short warm-up time that knocks back your target if it hits. So stopping power is now going to be more of a CC ability where it has a knockback instead of just doing a bunch of damage. And then I noticed another pretty big change here to the Sword and Shield. Those of you who have played Sword and Shield tank will know there's a pretty fun build you can do where if you take the reverse stab with the Tactician upgrade, you can reverse stab into a group of enemies, and that resets all of your cooldowns, including the reverse stab, and then you can use your Defiant Stance, you could use your Shield Rush or your Shield Bash, and then you could reverse stab again to lower all your cooldowns, and then you could use Defiant Stance, and so on and so forth. But they've broken the cycle now because the Tactician upgrade no longer reduces the cooldown of reverse stab. So you can still do a Defiant Stance to taunt everything and get the damage reduction, then hit them all with a reverse stab to completely reset the cooldown of Defiant Stance, and then pop Defiant Stance again for another taunt and another damage reduction, but it will no longer lower the cooldown of the actual reverse stab itself. So you're going to have to wait, I can't remember, the 15 to 20 seconds for the reverse stab to come off cooldown so you can do it again. So yeah, not quite as broken a combo as it previously was, but still going to be pretty effective to get like a double taunt off in multiple areas if you guys do enjoy using that build. The next notable change that I marked down was for Aversion. So there was a new perk that they added to the game back in December, I believe, or maybe November. It's called Elemental and Physical Aversion. So Elemental and Physical Aversion reduce the amount of damage you take from a ranged light or heavy attack. But in typical fashion with anything new introduced to New World, it was bugged and wasn't working properly, but now it should be working properly. So they say they fixed an issue where Elemental and Physical Aversion perks were not stacking properly. So for me, having a full set of Physical Aversion on all of my armor to really make those musket users in Outpost Rush cry is something I'm definitely going to be doing, because man, you know, just walking around the corner and immediately getting, you know, targeted by 6 different muskets, at least it won't completely deplete all my health in one go if I have full Physical Aversion on my armor. And for the PvP players, we've got some great changes coming into Outpost Rush here, some stuff that I'm pretty excited for. So in terms of the scoreboard, dealing damage now increases the player's score. It's kind of insane that previously doing damage didn't count towards your score in Outpost Rush, but now it will, thankfully. And they're going to reduce the amount of points you get from killing players, so trying to finish off that down isn't as important anymore. And also reducing the amount of points you get from killing AI, so Outpost Rush isn't going to be about PvE to get score anymore. So just good changes there to start off with. They're also trying to make a push so that the repeaters and the fire droppers, the siege weapons that you can build at the forts, have more of a use. Because they're going to be doing more damage in general, and they're also going to be doing bonus damage to the things you can summon. So in particular, the brutes, the big corrupted brutes, would take 200% more damage from the siege weapons like the repeaters. So might be worth, you know, building a repeater on top of your fort now to deal with the enemy's brutes. They've also reduced the length of Baroness Haine, so when you kill the Baron boss, it doesn't lock the score for as long. It's gone down to 2.5 minutes from 3 minutes. So not that much of a swing on the game, but still, you know, going to be pretty important. And then a big one here, something that I've been wanting to see since they introduced the Umbral Shards, is Outpost Rush now rewards Umbral Shards on completion of a match. 100 shards for the winning team and 50 shards for the losing team. I feel like it could be like 175. Because sometimes Outpost Rush is just horribly unbalanced, and there's, I don't know, it feels like there's nothing you can do to win it. Players must meet the minimum score threshold to be eligible for this reward, which I believe is 500 personal score when you open up the scoreboard. Outpost Rush is also going to reward faction tokens on completion of a match. Again, you've got to meet the minimum score to be able to get the reward, though. Outpost Rush caches now reward 2 pieces of Outpost Rush specific armor and an Outpost Rush specific weapon. There is an additional 15% chance for a 4th item, a piece of Outpost Rush jewelry. And then further on, they go down to state here that Outpost Rush gear now rolls off of a fixed list of perks that are more ideal for PvP combat. This means that traits like Beast Ward, which is you take less damage from beasts, won't be found on Outpost Rush gear. So I'm assuming like resilience, cooldown reduction, you know, things that are going to like impact player ability, so taking less damage from other players would be the stuff that we see in Outpost Rush gear. So this is pretty cool. I'm also suggesting or suspecting that it is a good idea to hold on to your Outpost Rush caches for when this patch goes live. I'm certainly going to be doing that now. Currently, I don't really think there's an advantage. Like, if you need to open them right now, then go for it. But for me personally, every Outpost Rush cache I get, I'm going to be saving and holding onto it now. Because what's happened in the past is I saved a bunch of these caches and then opened them after the Void Gauntlet came into the game. So I got them before the Void Gauntlet, and then I opened them after the Void Gauntlet was in the game, and I actually got Void Gauntlets out of my caches. So they do seem to determine their loot at time of opening rather than at time of receiving them. They could change this logic, but I think it is going to be a good idea to hold on to them if that is going to be the case. Again, unless you really need to open those caches right now. Last few things in the patch notes here that I thought were notable. Leveling for Arcana, Armoring, Engineering, Furnishing, Jewel Crafting, and Weaponsmithing trade skills will now require 10% less XP, so a little bit less of a grind to get your trade skills up to 200. They also mentioned that the Topaz Gypsum, the Obsidian Gypsum, and the Amethyst Gypsum are going to be dropping more frequently now, so you'll be able to get the black gypsum, as they call it, from 10 minutes down to 5 minutes. So every 5 minutes you'll be able to receive one of these, which are of course used for the gypsum orb, which you can then make into a cast, which you can use to increase your expertise. If you haven't seen the gypsum patch, I'll put a link to that in the description down below as well. That came back in November or December of last year. And finally, we're also going to be able to get smelting gear into the game as well. So every other form of refining right now, leatherworking, weaving, the other ones that I can't think of, woodworking, there's all refining gear for those, but there's also going to be smelting gear now, so there'll be a chance to craft additional ingots, including asmodium, I believe, if you open some tier 3 aptitude boxes. So those are gained when you sort of prestige your crafting smelting and push it past level 200 and get the extra levels on it. And then the final thing that I noticed in the patch notes that seemed to be significant was just here, they've created a trade chat channel. So now hopefully if you don't want to see all of those want to sell or WTS, WTB, you know, like people posting their goods, that should all go over to the trade chat now. And if you want to silence that, and I know I've seen a lot of people get angry in global chat because of how many want to sell messages are being spammed, well, that should all be off to a nice little corner now. So all in all, these patch notes do look pretty good. There's a lot of cool bug fixes in here that does address quite a few issues in the game. There's a lot more that I do want to see, and I'm a bit concerned I haven't seen anything concerning wars and how laggy and how much of a PowerPoint presentation they are right now. Like, it is really bad in wars, like as bad as it's been in the closed beta. Maybe they do say, like, up at the top here, this change list will be regularly updated up through retail release of the game version. So potentially we're going to see more added to this list as it goes on. And if there is anything significant, of course, we'll have a video ready for that one. Link to it up in the top right, but subscribe if you want to see it when it comes out. Yeah, good changes here. I want to see more, and I also want to see more communication from Amazon as well. I just feel like since they did their last developer update video, I haven't really heard from Amazon Game Studios, so it'd be great to know that they're still there, and also that our mutated expeditions are going to roll over to the next one, because we've had mutated Lazarus for 8 days now, and I think it's supposed to change every 7 days, so yeah. So just some sort of messaging as to what's going on there, but all in all, good patch notes. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Is there anything major that you believe they've missed out of this one? What's the most exciting thing for you? I feel like for me it is going to be the weapon swapping. I mean, that's just been a big issue for the longest time. But yeah, I'll keep you guys updated on these videos if you do want to see them. The best way to let me know if you do is to click that like button. But as always, guys, I'll see you all in the next one.